Thank you. So, you might be thinking, why would I talk about getting started with Scala? So, I will explain that in a bit, why I am able to talk about it and what we can do about getting started with Scala. So, hello, my name is Tomasz, and I'm happy to be here in Seattle, and I'm from a company called VirtusLab. But who am I exactly? So I am a lead of Scala CLI and Metals teams at VirtusLab. And previously, I've been also working in VirtusLab, but as a contributor for Scala Center. So I've been doing things for Scala Center while working in VirtusLab. Okay. And what did I work on? So I worked on a number of things, mostly open source projects, things like mdoc, Metals, which I'll mention today. I worked on the Scala Meta, Parser, and Semantic DB. I did a bit of work on the Scala free compiler, like small things related to things like completions or hovers, things like that. I also maintain Bloop, although I still need to do some work on that, and I will explain a bit what is Bloop later on. I also worked on various commercial projects. So you could say I mostly deal with tooling. So whenever there's something going on with the developer tooling, I'm there to try and help out. This is kind of a thing that is on our website. It's not important. What is important, what we came here to Seattle with. So we came with our brand new initiative called Scala Space. It's kind of a separate entity. It's led by Software Mill and VirtusLab, and it promotes some technical contributions to open source that we do on a really daily basis. We try to provide some interesting content for people to see that things are going, they're going maybe what exactly is happening with Scala and overall Scala open source. So if you want to learn more, you can come to our booth and we'll have some demos tomorrow. Okay, so let's get to getting started with Scala. So I decided to divide this presentation into questions. So those are questions people could ask if they're getting started with Scala. This could be beginners, this could be advanced users who are just coming to Scala from another language. And I am going to do an experiment because what I wanted to do, what is important for me, is getting feedback from the users, from you, to see if you see any problems, you have any questions about any kind of tooling that we work on, or maybe some tooling that we should work on. So I will show a Q&A section after each question I discuss, and you can post your questions on slido.com and enter the 3001 code. And anything that comes to mind, you can post. If there's some questions, I'll try to at least answer one for each section. But if there's not any questions, then I might manage to finish in time. So that's also good. So I'm prepared for both eventualities. And this will show up like that. So it will have a small delay. But you can see it will show up here once there's any questions. So why should we even care about getting started? So an obvious answer would be like absolute beginners. So somebody learning a language. But it's not only them. It might be newcomers. So people coming to the language from, I don't know, from Java, from Go. They want to learn what Scala is and what it offers. And you need that getting started experience so that they see the best of Scala without, at least at first, finding any difficulties, just finding the pure fun of Scala. And getting started experience is really important for everyone, because whenever you set up a new environment, you want to run something quickly, it all is driven by the getting started experience. it also kind of reflects on the maturity and the lengths at which the community is going to go to make the Scala experience better for everyone. So I believe it's a kind of, I don't remember the English word, but it's indicative of how well the tooling is doing. So the first question people would ask is how to install Scala. So basic question, right? There wouldn't be an obvious answer for a long time for Scala. You could install the basic Scala launcher, like the just Scala command, but it didn't provide really enough in terms of functionalities for you to do anything meaningful. So anything else would need a build tool. So it's obvious, it should be SBT, right? Maybe Gradle, or Maven, or Mill. And you should install Java. Yeah, which one though? Which the distribution of Java? So the first thing that helped really was Coursier setup, which would actually set up a lot of things for you. It would set up Java, it would set up SBT, Scala, Scala C, Java, Ammonite, Scala CLI, which I will come back in a second, and Scala format. So these are the ones I checked are being installed now with Scala setup. But that creates another question. So now we are actually using another package manager. So if you are using Brew and you install Scala, you wouldn't get Coursier and Coursier setup. You need to install Coursier, and then you will only be able to run this setup. So, and another thing is that even though you got all those things installed, you would still have to learn a build tool to do anything meaningful, because the Scala launcher, the Scala command, would be the same as it was previously. But you have heard probably about Scala CLI, and I believe it's one of the cornerstones of a really nice getting started experience, and it will soon be in all your favorite package managers. It's still not there, so for now you can install it via Brew, via this longer command, or via CS setup. And if you do CS install Scala experimental, it will replace the Scala CLI that you get installed with Scala. Or you can just install Scala CLI, which will work exactly the same, but with a different command. And what does Scala CLI give you? So it gives you all the basic functionalities you could wish, like run, test, format, rep, like IDE support, everything right from the start. The basic example of usage would be just having, for example, this Scala free snippet that will say hello, and you can, with Scala CLI, you can just run that. That is a very basic functionality, but it requires just that. There's a lot more things that you can actually do, but I'll come back to that in some other questions. Okay, so I ask you to add some questions, and maybe you could also complain about certain aspects of getting started experience, but I already have my picks, actually. So one of the first ones would be that Scala CLI is not really yet updated for the package managers. If you install Scala from the package managers, you get the old runner. We're working on that. We found some regressions in the Scala CLI 1.0.0 version. And as soon as we tackle that, we will start with Coursier and Brew, and then move to all the package managers. So anything you use will be supported. Although that also could cause another issue, because this way there could be two ways of installing that Scala CLI. You could install it via package manager or via Coursier. So this kind of, people could complain about that, but might not turn out to be a big issue. And last issue, maybe not really an issue, but Scala CLI is mostly directed towards like smaller project scripts, single files, beginner users. And if you have anything more complex, you still will need to figure out how to use a build tool. So that's not perfect. Okay, let's see if we have any questions. Yeah, nothing yet. Good. I'm on time. All right. So once you installed Scala, you might want to write Scala. And I will start with a tiny bit of history. So at some point, you get three things that you could use to write Scala. First, probably, I tried to check the timeline, but I couldn't exactly estimate which was first, but I would assume Scala ID would be first, which is based on Eclipse. Then maybe IntelliJ popped out with a Scala plugin, and also we would have Enzyme, which would support, I think, Emacs. It supported Emacs maybe, and Vim, I think. Rory can probably, if he's here, if he's not here, I can catch him and ask that. But apparently, according to Sam, about 10% of the user base, of Scala user base, was at some point using Enzyme. So that's a pretty large achievement. And that was the state before LSP. Once LSP came and Metals got created by Olafur, who might be somewhere here. Once that came to be, it actually created a large amount of opportunities to us, for us. But let's say what exactly LSP is. It is the language server protocol. It defines the exchanges between the client, so like the editor. It can be Vim, VS Code, anything, any editor can support that. And the server. So it will send some messages that are clearly defined to the server to get language support. And it uses JSON RPC for that, so JSON's back and forth. And it's backed by Microsoft and used widely in open source community. I would say, just to paraphrase what I said, it abstracts language support from the UI. And it's very well defined. It's supported in a lot of editors, and any new editor that is created will most likely come with an LSP support. And it also, LSP especially, makes it really easy to support the language without any knowledge of how to really do anything within the editor. So any plugins or that stuff, you don't really need that. Maybe some editors might require for making the experience smoother, adding some plugins, but most of the cases, it's not necessary. And why is LSP important for us and the getting started experience? So it is important because if you're starting with a language, you want to have a choice how to write that language. And if you're starting and moving from another language and you're already used with to an editor, you shouldn't need to just use IntelliJ and learn IntelliJ. You should be able to use the editor you have been using all along. And that is another thing that eliminates additional barriers of entry to the language. And I know that tooling is pretty important, so we need to have IntelliJ and we need to have it properly working. But language isn't just about IntelliJ. It should be much more. It should be a much richer ecosystem. So coming back to the question, if you want to know how to write Scala, well, that depends. So you didn't expect that answer probably, but it depends on what kind of user you are. If you're a beginner and you haven't written anything in your life, you might try Metals, you might try IntelliJ, see what works for you, what doesn't. You can ask at your company, at university, or at the you can ask the community for pointers, and try to figure it out for yourself. If you're new to the language, but you already know some programming, then you should probably stick to whatever editor you're using and just use that for Scala. It is now possible thanks to LSP, and you should have always have the choice to stick with whatever works best for you. And as an additional thing, LSP creates new ways of destroying barriers of entry. Like if you have an older machine, maybe you cannot install something on your machine, or you don't have a computer, you just have maybe a possibility to use a browser, then you can, for example, use online IDEs, which things like Gitpod or GitHub code spaces will work with LSP. So you will get proper editor support in there. So you could set up courses for your students that they have everything prepared beforehand so that they can just start coding, and everybody can have exactly the same environment, so that you don't have to actually set up something for everyone in your audience, in your classroom, for example. So this really is a great improvement for getting started. Just to, like, if somebody doesn't know to install IntelliJ, you can go to the website, just download it. It's pretty simple. And if you use Metals, the best supported ones are VS Code, Emacs, Sublime Text, and NeoVim. We have dedicated plugins there that really smoothen the experience of getting started there. And if you want to know how to actually get started with those editors, you can go to our website, scalameta.org/metals, and there should be enough information there to get you started with any of those editors. For any beginners, I would recommend VS Code because it just requires you to install the Metals extension. And as previously, I already have my pick of issues that we currently have. So I believe there's not enough guides for setting up, like how to get started from IntelliJ, for example. If somebody wants to migrate to Metals, I should probably write that, but I didn't have the time. There's no like a single file workflow, default one. We could use Scala CLI for if anybody creates a file and opens IntelliJ or opens Metals, we could just throw Scala CLI underneath and it should work because it supports IDEs. So that would be a great improvement. So users who just want to write something and they create the file, they would be able to do something. Metals has some stability issues, which I'm working on. IntelliJ has support issues for Scala 3, although they are doing incredible work fixing them. And if you have any suggestions or something is not working for you, I will actually be meeting with Maciej next week, who is the developer advocate. So if I tell him any of your issues, I'm pretty sure he'll push to get them fixed pretty quickly. And if those are actually fixed, you can check that in the Scala plugin nightlist. And the last one is that we haven't really done any exploration of that workflow which I was describing with online IDEs. So no way of set up things for users, like have a precompiled workspace so that you don't have to do. There wasn't done any exploration, any easy way of how to do that. And I think that would be useful for a lot of companies, a lot of classrooms, and a lot of universities. Okay, let's see if we get some question. Yes, no question more, because I was hoping there would be no complaints. You can put complaints here too, so that's fine. All right, so once you install Scala, wrote a bit of Scala, you need to compile it. And obviously, this is done by the compiler. And but how do we actually can interact with the compiler while writing code? This is important. We don't want to invoke the compiler each time manually anything changes. We want that to be done automatically. And there's two ways, I believe, that this is done currently. It's either built-in compilation, like in IntelliJ, or done through this additional protocol called build server protocol. And Metals supports only the latter, so build server protocol. And I want to talk a bit about that and why it's important for my main topic. So build server protocol is similar to LSP. It solves a very similar problem. it solved the problem of having many build tools and many clients or LSP servers so that they don't have to integrate every possible connection between them. It was created along with Bloop, which is the first build server that supports that protocol, and was done in cooperation with JetBrains. And thanks to that, clients in an editor can directly interact with the build tool. You can do it in command line. You can do it in the IDE. It will be the same tool underneath that you're interacting with. There's no additional abstraction inside an IDE that you need to make sure works. And this kind of also reduces the barrier between command line and the editor, because any compilation you do here and any compilation you do on CLI and the editor is the same thing. Just because I added this quick graph of how it actually works within Metals, just a quick look, because I got asked about that quite a few times. Metals, like the editor can ask Metals about things like language related, and Metals will ask the BSP server, for example, Bloop, to compile stuff, to run stuff, test stuff, things like the build tool like SBT could do for you. And again, why is BSP important for Scala? So you can see a reason here. We had so many build tools, and we don't want to have to support each of that of the build tool with Metals. There's a lot of different implementations of BSP, which thanks to the fact that protocol is clearly defined, will work with Metals and IntelliJ. So the first one would be Bloop, which was the first build server. It works on your machine. It's created only once for your machine, and it can compile multiple projects. You also can have SBT as a BSP server. It works for a single project. So when you start a BSP server, like SBT BSP server, it will start for that workspace. And if you open another one, it will start another one and another one and another one, which is the main difference between Bloop and SBT. Mill will also work the same. It will start a separate BSP server for each of your workspaces. We also have Bazel BSP, which is a thing JetBrains is working on, which will soon greatly improve the way people are working with Bazel. Scala CLI, which I mentioned earlier, provides IDE support thanks to BSP. And there's the last mention of a very interesting tool that it has a really nice way of configuring things, which is Blip. But when we are getting started, we might ask a question, which one we should use, which provides the best getting started experience? Well, that depends again. So if you're doing a single file or a script, you would use Scala CLI, and you would use that BSP server underneath. If you're having maybe a complex mill or SBT project, you might want to use a dedicated BSP server. If it's a simple thing and it's beginner, if you're a beginner, have a small project, you don't push your build to the limit, probably the best thing is to export your project to Bloop, which is the default way Metals will do things, because that works for us the best. And that also makes sure that you don't use too much resources on your machine, because there's only one server running at any point. And for all of you coming to big projects, Bazel with BSP will be a godsend, and there's a lot of work being done on a separate BSP plugin for IntelliJ, for example, which is coming to IntelliJ with Bazel especially in mind, and Bazel BSP, because the support for Bazel in any editor is still lagging, and it's problematic to work with Bazel if you want to change something. It's really great when compiling, caching, and it has a lot of great stuff, but modifying it, making sure it all works is problematic. And of course, I come with you with my own pick of issues. So we still need to improve some of those BSP servers to make sure that they work properly for everyone. For example, one thing that SBT BSP could improve is to be able to run more tasks. So currently, if you run compile and you cannot run compile in the editor, you cannot run in the console, you have to wait until the compilation finishes. It can be only one task at any point. There's also some stability issues because BSP is a protocol that you use between two different processes. So those processes need to actually be alive for both for your language support, for your compilation. And if they die, it might be problematic. It might be hard to detect that. Bloop is the most mature here, but it is in dire need of refactoring, which might probably be my fault. I should probably work on that more. And also Bloop has a fork, which we need to migrate back and merge back so that we don't have to support those two things. And there's still ongoing work for Bazel USB that's still not ready. And I'm sure that it's important for people to, like if you're starting a larger project, you want to be able to quickly jump into how to work on that project and change things. You don't want to learn how things are done around Bazel in that project. Okay, I think we have a question. Scala CLI Notebook. We don't support notebooks currently, but we have some ideas on how to support them. We might do that in the future if there's demand for it. We've seen also some people talking about live books, things that you could deploy. I don't really understand that. You can check that because I didn't have time before checking. But there's a lot of ideas on how to make like this workflow of working and deploying things, working, changing things, how to make that much better. Okay, so we've done compilation. Now we can run something or test something. And the best way to do that will be via Scala CLI. So that's my pick for running. And you can run usual files, you can run scripts, you can run JS, you can run native, you can even, debugging is there right from the start, so you can connect with your favorite debugger and to debug your application. But what is more, you can even test right from the start. So you can create tests, and Scala CLI has the test command that you can use to just run any test you want. And here, for example, we see munit being used. And you can see at the top, maybe it's not super visible, but in the comment, you have something called a using directive. So it's so you don't always need to define everything as flags for a command line. You can actually save those in those special comments that will be attached whenever you run something or compile something. You can define the Scala version, the platform, some Scala options, so everything can be defined. The Scala CLI is not the main point. It is very useful for getting started experience. It's one of our initiatives, but it's not the main thing. I don't have enough time to cover everything. But I highly recommend taking a look at the documentation where it mentions all the possibilities of how you can use Scala CLI. There's a lot of stuff there. But what about IDEs? So I told about command line. What about IDEs? So both Metals and IntelliJ support run and debug. It's obvious for IntelliJ. Most people who worked with Scala for a while know IntelliJ has really nice run and debug support. But how, for me, it's more interesting to explain what are the possibilities in Metals and what we do differently that might be useful for beginners, for users in general. And of course, you can also run debug stuff within IDE with Scala CLI underneath it all. So running in Metals has a few different ways. You can just use cold lenses with run. This will start this separate task view that will be reused. That task view is the typical way, for example, of running things inside of VS Code. If you look, for example, for Rust Analyzer, it does the same thing. And it's fast because it just uses Java, and that's the class path. And so it's very quick to run anything you want. And it will work with Scala CLI scripts. And you can also debug those Scala CLI scripts. So there's also a debugger within Metals. So if you run debug, it runs things differently. This is the default way of running things. It's another protocol called debug adapter protocol, and there is this special library done by Adrian Piqueres of Scala Center, the Scala adapter library that uses this DAP protocol to provide debugging support to any editor you might want. So it will also work in things like Advim, and I think there's people who also made it work with Emacs. We will also support, this is very small, but just wanted to show something. We'll also support running native or JS from within Metals, which is a new thing. It wasn't supported for IntelliJ. Maybe if we do that, IntelliJ will also support that, because I will talk with them like, oh, why don't you support that? And maybe they will. And another thing that I think is really nice, it's also in VS Code, but it can be implemented probably in other, it's not part of LSP, so that's important to mention, is this Test Explorer. So on the left, it doesn't need to be on the left, but there's a panel that you can search and look for all the tests in your project and just run any of them. And you can also debug them. You can search all the test cases you have. It's really handy, and I think it's nice to try it out. And again, I am back here with some issues that I know of. So tests in Metals are a bit slow. They are being worked on to be improved, because there's before running a test, it's actually being, the sources, everything is being indexed so that we provide the breakpoints. But if you're just running tests, you don't need the breakpoints. So there's an improvement that I need to fetch from the newer version of Scala Debug Adapter, that it will not do any indexing. There was a bit of a regression in Scala CLI 1.0.0, which will be fixed in 1.0.1, that broke a bit the script support, but that will be fixed very soon. And debugging is a very complex topic. There's a lot of work being done on that front. We're doing some improvements. By we mean Adrian, and I think he had some help from a student at EPFL, where there's this two-pronged way of evaluating expressions. And for example, if the first thing you will try is use a parser to try to invoke some Java stuff. I don't want to get into that too much, because that's another topic, but suffice it to say, there's this parser approach, and then if that doesn't work and we need to have some implicit or anything, we'll just use the compiler to compile and run that specific snippet. Okay. So I have a question. What are recommendations in 2023? That's for running or debugging. So those are actually my recommendations for 2023. I'm not sure what the question is exactly about, but if you want, I will be at our booth later on, and I will try to tell you my opinions there. Okay, so another question I decided to ask myself is how and which Scala libraries to get. So if you're running an application, soon you need something more. You will need some dependencies, some library that handles something. So if you know which library you want to use and you want to discover it, there's some ways of doing it. You can use Cursor Resolve, but that requires you to know at least the organization of the library that you want to use. But if you know that, it will be very handy to find all the versions, all the names of libraries for that organization. Metals reuses that mechanism for Ammonite scripts, for worksheets, for Scala CLI and SBT completion. So if you're in worksheets Scala CLI using directives or in SBT dependencies, we try to provide automatic completions for organization names, module names, and versions. IntelliJ also has some suggestions, but last time I tried it, it was a bit limited. It only found the names, didn't find the versions. I might need to mention that to the IntelliJ team, but I didn't have the time. If you want, there's a nice plugin for VS Code that uses Scala Dex to provide suggestions, and you can go to Scala Dex, which is a place where all information about different Scala libraries is kept, and you can search through that. But which libraries to get is the bigger question. So if you, for example, want a JSON library, there's plenty of them. So to combat that, you already heard that we introduced Scala Toolkit. So Scala Toolkit has a couple of libraries right from the start, like at this point, and we are wanting to improve the amount of libraries. We have a JSON library, we have the OSLib for interacting with file system, and not only, but there's more. Then we also have HTTP client, and we have a testing library. So there's 4 from the start. And this is actual dependency you can add to your project. But for Scala CLI, we added this easier directive. So you can just specify using toolkit and which version. You can use latest. And you'll get that all the libraries you need. Here you will get the testing library for testing, which will be munit. Yeah. So, but there's more. We will be able to provide different toolkits. So, for example, there's already a type level toolkit, which is the toolkit for functional programming. So if you want to get started with type level stack, this will probably be the best way to get started, because you get everything right from the start and you don't have to really do a lot. You just write using toolkit type level :latest. It's a bit more involved, but this way we'll be able to provide any number of toolkits that people will want to create. And it has a lot of advantages. So it adds more accessibility to the language, because it kind of is an attachment, some additions to the standard library. So you get standard library and then you add the toolkit, and you already have a lot of things to work with and to solve your problems. And this kind of also creates pathways to follow. So if you use toolkit, you know you will use JSON, and then you know you will use HTTP, STTP, and OSLib. And so it makes those pathways, like what you need to use, pretty easy to follow. And this is also like makes this a standardized approach. And probably all that means same, but I wanted to, I really like the approach toolkit and the possibilities it gives us. That's why I wrote so many nice words about it. The current issues with libraries and getting libraries. So for me, essentially, like the cross-version suffix is a bit problematic. So like if you have, if you write dependency, you will probably see that sometimes you need to do colon colon or even colon colon in 2 places, and that's because you might want to have a different platform, or you might have a specific binary version of the dependency that because it's not a Java library, and I believe it's a bit of an issue because it's easy to miss that, and we should probably fix that. Toolkit, for example, is in early phases. We still need to add more libraries. We need to add more libraries so that out of the box, it's possible to do much more. Maybe another one I would think of, maybe the coordinates like org name version are quite long, and maybe we could have some aliases. That's just spitballing. I'm thinking of some ways to improve like this getting started experience. The directives are a thing that some people love, some people hate, and I think I'm one of the people who really like those, because you can do this using Toolkit, and using dep, which adds any dependency you want. But this could potentially be overused. You could have multiple files and dependencies and defining multiple files. We do combat that. We do warnings. We might also do errors in that case, but there's a potential of overusing that. And there's also no automatic completion of certain directives. So if it's hard to discover them currently. So you have to know there's a dependency directive, there's a toolkit directive, and we need to improve that. And in Metals, and especially in IntelliJ, which we haven't yet done much work on that. But we want Metals and IntelliJ both to support toolkit properly. Okay. Does Metals support Java dependency completions now? So if you're in Java files, the completions currently doesn't work, but it will soon work. If you mean getting Java dependencies via using directive, that should work. Like if you mean like completions of if you write, for example, organization name, we use actually Kursor Resolve for that. So that should work. Although if you're in comments, by default, VS Code will turn off completions there, but you can invoke them manually. So that's you can change that, but that's the default behavior of VS Code. So people might not discover that, unfortunately. All right. So I have a bonus question. I don't have much time for that. How to work with corporate environments. The problem here is I don't actually have any corporate environments to test things on. So this is kind of a call to action. We have some things in Metals. There's a separate page. It's easy to find. But my main thing here is the question, how can we actually do better here? So if you're having problems within your corporate environment, we would be happy to do anything really to help you out, because this is essential thing for getting started experience, to get anywhere, like get Scala anywhere, get it working properly anywhere you might want. Hey, there's another question. Metals doesn't provide Scala free tree navigation like Scala 2. Is this being worked on? Tree navigation. If you mean the outlines, that should work. Although if you mean there's the separate Metals panel, that provides there's additional way to traverse files in your project. That doesn't work. I need to work on that. It's not currently being worked on, but I remember about that, and I have to. I think I need to rework that panel anyway, because we have a lot of ideas how to make that a much more usable place. Okay, so I think I have time for one more question, which is one that is most interesting for me. So how to fix errors? Errors are a way of how the compiler actually communicates with the users. So any mistakes you make, this is the way the compiler will tell you, hey, this is wrong. And clear errors are very important. So there's a lot of improvements on that front. If you look at the Godzik repository, there's plenty of PRs that are actually just adding messages, adding more context so that the users can know better what is going on. Every error code in Scala 3, every error in Scala 3 has a code, which I'm not sure if yet we can use to index, but we could possibly in the future have an index of all the errors and just link to that from the error shown in the IDE. So that would provide all the necessary context for you. We have a new explain option. So if you see here, we have an error. If you see a simple message, it just tells you it found an A and requires an int. But if you use explain, you get a lot more information. So that is pretty useful when dealing with something that you don't understand and what all the context that you might need. Of course, that is also being improved. But we can do better, much better. So there's an initiative called the actionable diagnostic. So the compiler and the build tools know a lot of the times they know how to fix their own stuff. They know how to fix, like, for example, if you have missing methods, like you need to add methods because you inherit from a class, then the compiler actually knows exactly which methods are missing. It could provide you with a quick fix to fix that. And there's work being done by Chris Kipp mostly. He's driving the effort. He's not the only person working on that, but he's driving the effort. And there will be an additional quick fix attached to diagnostics. It can be attached to diagnostics in the future. That will show up in IDE, both in Metals and IntelliJ. And so the compiler team will be able to just create quick fixes whenever they find any error that can be fixed. So the users can try it out and have that working in no time. So there's more possibilities of interacting directly with what the compiler knows. We have a small POC within Scala CLI, and what it does is it automatically suggests a bump of a version if there's a new version available, that works pretty nice. Some people are, if they want it, Paint don't want it, but I believe it's very useful and it's a really nice way of showing the possibilities of actionable diagnostics. And last thing I wanted to say about that is that we have plenty of work for actionable diagnostics. We need to work on that. There's still a lot of things to do there. The explain option, for example, is another thing. It's very useful, but it's very problematic if you have a large code base to use that explain option, because you will have to rerun the whole thing to get the really nice message. And this is something we can work on and improve. And there's also a lot of work to be done on making the compiler messages clear, because that is a never-ending story. It's always possible to make things clearer, and there's plenty of errors to fix. So let's see if I can do a final question. Yeah, there's no question. So another question I had is how to refactor Scala code, and what I wanted to say that we want to do a better integration with ScalaFix and use ScalaFix, but I will not delve to that because I'm already over the limit. And thank you. If you have more questions, I'll be at our booth probably for the next half an hour before the keynote. If you want to find me, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Mastodon. You can send me an email at VirtusLab, and thank you for listening. I hope this showed you the lengths at which we're working to make the Scala a more welcoming experience and a better experience overall. Thank you very much.